Hi, once again, this is Ed from Exotic Blanks, welcoming you to another video. The subject of this one is hybrid pen blanks, how to turn and finish them. Obviously, we begin by selecting a blank. Then we measure the brass tube diameter. In this case, it's 4.13 approximately. Then I go to a chart and look for 4.13. In this case, I'm going to use the 27/64 bit because with a hybrid, you know that it's going to change a little. What I mean when I say it's going to change a little, when a blank is wood, as the hybrids are, it will close the hole slightly after you're finished drilling it. So when you look at what size drill bit you want to use, you want to stick to a drill bit that's slightly larger than what you really need, so that you will be able to slide in and out when you're finished with the brass tube going in and out without resistance. As you can see, I'm using a roughing gouge because somebody asked about using roughing gouges this week. It's not difficult if you watch the way that I'm actually turning. I'm using the straight side of that roughing gouge to make the cut. So it's very similar to using a skew. You're just pulling it across and back, and as you can see, everything came out in ribbons. Now we're going to face the front of the ends of the blank, face or square the ends. I do that with this sandpaper jig. The sandpaper disc on the headstock, and a jig that I'll tell you about in one of my future videos. And then this, just spin it on there and it takes off the extra to bring you down to the brass tube size. When you're finished doing that, you will see that there's a bit of what I call a wobble. The ends, because they were not square before, now travel differently, and so there's a wobble to the ends. If you're concerned about that, if you're afraid you're going to break it off or have problems with it, start in the center of the blank and turn towards the outside. And after 2 or 3 passes, you're no longer going to have that wobble because you'll have the thing turned back around to being concentric. So it's not a big deal, but some people get nervous about that because it's wobbling. Now in this case, this blank was beautiful. It was listed as a reject because it didn't have a lot of different flavor in it. One side was wood, the other side was resin, but it was a beautiful blue resin. So it was a pretty pen, but nonetheless it was labeled as a reject. So what I did essentially is just use it. So as you can see here, I'm using a sharp skew, a small skew, to finish off the 2 ends so that it gets just down to the size that it's supposed to be. Now, with some hybrids, you may want to stop at about this point and apply thin CA to it. If you look at it and see that there are gaps or there's difficulty with it not looking like it's holding up well, then put some thin CA on it and let it sit for a period of time, 15, 20 minutes, whatever, or overnight if you've got that kind of time. So this didn't require that. Every time I stopped the lathe and looked at it, it looked great. nothing was coming apart. As you can see, the junction between the wood and the acrylic is very, very clean. So I start with 400 grit, and then I move to 600 grit sandpaper, as I always do. Nothing special about this. It's very simple. I did turn down the speed on the lathe. I don't know if you can notice that or not, but when I'm turning at about 3,200 RPM. When I'm doing sanding, I go around 1,200 RPM. And of course, when we're all finished sanding it and take a look at it, it's going to have sandpaper dust on it. So the next step after that is, what do we do to get the sandpaper dust off? I use boiled linseed oil, BLO, and that's what you'll see next as I run the lathe and put a little boiled linseed oil on a rag and clean it up so that there's no sawdust in it. If I'm going to put a finish on it, I don't want to put a finish over the top of the sawdust buried in it. It will show up. So this is to get rid of all that sawdust and clean up the blank. Remember, if you do this, that BLO is an accelerator for CA, so make sure that you clean it off as much as you can and realize that that first layer of CA is probably going to be a little hot. In this case, it wasn't bad at all. Take off the bushings so you don't glue your bushings to your blank when you start doing a CA finish. In my case, I use Glue Boost all the time, but Glue Boost will glue the bushings to it if you're not careful. So easier to just not have that possibility by taking off the bushings. I don't use my Glue Boost all the time, and it became obvious. There was a block on it, and when the block broke, I got an awful lot of glue that came out all at one time. So now I'm just trying to thin it, to even it out, and use it as part of the coat that was going to go on there. Give it a quick burst of accelerator now that it's kind of leveled out, and test it just to make sure that it's actually dry or dry to the touch. As you can see, it's starting to look pretty good and shiny. Because of all that came out, I'm fairly sparse on the next couple of coats. My procedure is to let it sit overnight whenever I can, and then the next day, of course, it's got peaks and valleys in it because I haven't done anything to level it out yet. The next day I will run this lathe with about 600, 700 RPM and 600 grit sandpaper just to even out the coat, just to make it so that there's no peaks and valleys. Once that's done, I take it to the buffer and use Triple E first and then White Diamond, and that will give me a beautiful finish look. You saw the pen at the beginning of this video. You'll also see the pen at the end of the video. As you can see, it turned out really, really well, except that it is all blue resin on one side and all wood on the other side. But it's a nice looking pen anyway. As you can see, the blue resin has a really cool kind of a green look to it as well, and it's got a lot of mica in it. It's very, very pearly. And there you see the successful end of the turning. It made a diamond knurl out of it, and I like the golden chrome. I thought it looked kind of nice with all that blue pearl. So that's my story. Hope you enjoyed the video, and please subscribe to the channel, and look forward to seeing you next time. This is Ed from Exotic Blanks.